Okay, well, it is time to get started. So I will go ahead and do that. Welcome to Stepping Stones from Diversity Learning to Equitable Actions. And I do want to say once again, real quick, that is Harrison Lake in the background. If anyone's interested, Harrison Hot Springs in British Columbia, Canada. And as we go through this, I'm going to build up through the different things we're going to talk about. I'm just going to start with an introduction. My name is Cindy Gross. My pronouns are she, her. And I spent 25 years in tech. And, heads down, most technical person that I could be, SQL Server, big data, the Windows team, all sorts of involvement in moving people off of on-premises into the cloud, in my case, Azure. And then something happened, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. And so now I'm a generative coach, and that means that most of the time I'm asking questions way more than I'm telling anything else. So it's really about leaning into an inquisitive curiosity. I'm also an adaptive leader, and my adaptive leadership principles are all throughout everything that I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the presentation. Adaptive leadership is a type of leadership that is relationship first, and it is all about changing hearts and minds, repointing people involved in an effort towards a new way of looking at the world and a new way of working together so that you can create an outcome that is beneficial to everyone who's directly involved in the situation. Too often decisions are made by somebody at the top of a hierarchy, and they're made without consulting the people most affected. So adaptive leadership is a way of approaching that differently so that stakeholders truly have input into the solution. I'm the CEO of my own small business called Befriending Dragons. And overall, I'm just a very joyful person now that I'm not within the constraints of the corporate environment. I do want to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. Some of you may be familiar with this. And I live in Issaquah, Washington. That's just outside Seattle in the United States. I do live on land stolen from the Duwamish and the Coast Salish. I'm a citizen of the United States and the Delaware Tribe of Indians and Cherokee Nation, which means that I am the descendant of colonizers and those they tried to destroy. And it's very important to think about our connection to the land. It's very important to think about how history shapes us and how being rooted in our history and understanding more about the realities of what's happened in the past gives us more options for how we choose to go forward into the future. If you want to find out what traditional land you reside on, you can go to native-land.ca. That's in the lower left-hand corner. And if you want a much longer example based on a land acknowledgement I gave, it's around 3 or 4 minutes long, at the CEO venture announcement this year, you can go to medium.befriendingdragons.com. And I do encourage you to learn more about the lands that you live on. We're going to talk about systems of oppression and how individuals operate within systems. So, for example, racism is the systemic unequal distribution of power and resources on the base of race to uphold white supremacy. And you can go back and substitute sexism, gender, and patriarchy as well. So that's what I mean when I talk about systems of oppression, or when I refer to purity cultures, that's what I'm talking about. And the way that systems work is that systems set the norms. They set what's acceptable. They set all of the boundaries around us. And the boundaries are often well hidden, and they're disguised as things like merit or best, or we only hire people who have done something that is very vague, but is made to sound very definite. They're based on exclusion, and they're controlling possible outcomes, even if it's not easy from the outside to see what those possible outcomes might be. And systems will continue to produce those outcomes regardless of the intent of the people in the room. Every person in the room can have the best intentions in the world to not be racist, and the outcomes could still uphold white supremacy. So that's some foundational knowledge for what we're going to talk about. So when we talk about stepping stones to equitable actions, these are things that workplaces need to do in addition to traditional DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So the things I'm going to talk about today are reshaping white male bars, lasting systemic disruptions, and a tool that I call question the narrative. So let's go into that. I spent, as I said, 25 years in tech. And that's a world where being hyperlogical, emotionless, and always sure you are 100% right is just table stakes for entry to the room. Constant reminders that I didn't fit. In a room full of men, I said I had women candidates for an open position, and my manager's immediate instinctive response, anyone want to guess? We won't lower the bar for them. He didn't know anything about them. He just assumed they weren't meritorious enough to be hired. And read between the lines, because he was also telling me the bar was lowered to let me in as the only woman on the team. But in reality, these bars weren't lowered. Nothing was lowered because the bar is shaped like those already in power. The bar is shaped and overwhelmingly built around the profile of white men. It's full of irrelevant gates that exclude many qualified people, and it can cut the rest of us to shreds as we fight our way in. I changed so many things about myself instead of changing the system, but I never fit because the system didn't change. I was constantly thinking, why can't I get me right? As if there was a right way for me to exist in the universe. But the system was telling me there was one right way. Because I love dragons, I was wondering why my dragon scales are too shiny, not shiny enough. Why is my dragon roar silenced? Which means I lost my voice. When did I start spending so much emotional energy to walk a fine line between likable and competent? When did I give in to the bullies that are encouraged by the system? And that white male bar became even tighter and more cutting when I reported the worst bully, a sexual harasser, to my manager. My manager told me to silence myself, to keep quiet. What I heard, or what the system told me with my manager's voice, was that my voice was destructive to my career. The brilliant jerk, as he was called, who harassed me, was considered too valuable to the team, and I was clearly not valuable enough. I was bleeding from the white male bar. I took my dragon roar, I internalized it as a silent scream. I tried to muffle my inner cries. I focused on creating success by being less authentic because that's what the bar required. I knew if I could make myself one of the guys, I could win. I tried so hard to squeeze myself through those white male-shaped success bars without being cut to shreds. I tried to control everything, myself, my voice, my manager, my coworkers, how much of myself I shared with those closest to me only. I didn't. The more I silenced myself, the more I changed my dragon roar into a silent scream, the more I lost myself. And that's what the system taught me to do. The system taught me I was a solitary dragon, safe in my lonely cave. I was surviving. Thriving wasn't a thought. I hoarded my energy, my thoughts, my feelings, and I shape-shifted into a shadow of myself. I closed all the gates around me to keep the bad things away, ignoring I also kept the good things away. And like so many trauma victims, I internalized the bully's actions, the system, as my own fault. HR tried to find the balance of action so neither of us would sue or speak out too much, even after they agreed the bully had harassed me, but they misjudged because I spoke out. I reclaimed my voice in small groups from a stage and then loudly for the entire world to hear. I left Microsoft without signing their confidentiality agreement, without letting them steal my voice once again in return for a few months' pay. With the help of my therapist, good friends, coaches, I stopped looking at myself as a scary dragon. The jerk who bullied me, the coworkers who excused him, they don't define me. I don't have to shrink myself. I don't have to become invisible and silent to people like him. I choose to see myself as a friendly dragon who can fly where I want, when I want, how I want. But there's the reality of the system. a white patriarchy, a system that builds success bars shaped like a narrow subset of cisgender, heterosexual, fully abled white men. Because of my own white privilege, because of the perseverance and grit and pure luck that let me slide through the edges of the white patriarchy for a while, at 52, I have the freedom to put myself in a world where I can thrive. My dragon scales are just fine the way they are. I choose what kind of light to shine on them, on myself, and I continue to befriend my internal dragons instead of trying to fix myself, because there's nothing wrong with me and there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with most of the people who face barriers in tech, no matter what the system says. Unfortunately, for all of that to work out for me, I had to leave tech. Tech lost my 25 years of experience. Tech lost my extensive global network across multiple technologies, companies, industries, and skill sets. Tech lost me. And this is why we have to reshape success in hiring bars, so tech doesn't keep losing everyone who doesn't fit a narrow mold. So, how do we do that? Well, we create lasting systemic disruptions. We start with befriending our internal dragons. So the things we tell ourselves about how we have to exist, how we should do things, are shaped by the systems around us, the cultures around us, the people around us. And we can choose to respond differently, to listen to our internal dragons differently. And I call that befriending dragons, and hence the name of my business. We can nurture equitable cultures. We can stop blocking marginalized voices. We don't need to save other people, the people who are marginalized by the system, women, people who aren't white, people with various types of disabilities, people with autism. We don't need to save them. We need to unblock them. We need to make sure that they have the power they innately have, and that it's rewarded within a system, that they have decision-making power. And that requires finding the right levers, and that requires leading with empathy, with changing the way that we look at ourselves and the world around us, that we lead with empathy, community, connection, relationship first, and learning in public. One of the tools that I use to do that is something I call question the narrative. And if you do these 4 things with everything that's going on around you, you have a good chance of disrupting the systems. And the first question to ask is always, who is centered in the story? Who has agency? Who makes the decisions? Who gets to decide what the next steps are? A lot of times when you hear about harassment, like the story I tell, people will say, well, what about him? That is centering him. What they should be asking is, what about me? What about my coworkers who abandoned me? Those are the questions to ask, like who's being centered in each of those? And that includes our internal voices and the internal stories we tell ourselves. So any story that we hear, repeat, amplify, or tell, ask who's centered. Think about the power dynamics. Who had the agency? What gave them the agency? Would they have had agency in another system? And by agency, I mean the ability to make our own decisions, like the leading lady in a movie has all the agency. And what are the other truths? When somebody says, well, we hired this person because they had 5 years of experience instead of that person that had 4 years of experience, and that's the reason that they give, you can ask, and what else? Like, did you hire somebody who looked just like everybody else on the team? Or did you hire somebody who adds something to the team? The fact that this other person might have communication skills that the person you hired didn't. They might have lived experiences they can bring. Maybe they understand how to deal with online harassment because it's a Black woman or an Indigenous woman, a trans woman who has lived through that and has built in strategies. And the fact that they might have 1 less year of experience in that specific technology maybe isn't as relevant as you're making it sound. So always do the and. I agree, it's true that this merit-based statement you're making is true. And what else is going on there? What are some other ways we could tell this story to each other? And what are some other ways that we can look at this? How can we get curious and inquisitive about this to tell a more equitable story? So if you do those 4 things, every time you read a news story, every time a leader in your company talks about a hiring initiative or how promotions happen, use these tools to help figure out more about what's going on and open up options. So coming back to the practical side of things, everyone needs to own JEDI. It's no longer D&I, diversity and inclusion. It shouldn't be diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. It should be JEDI. It should be justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's not something that belongs in HR. It's not something that you get at foods festivals and from famous people. It's something that each one of us owns every day, from the way we set deadlines and choose projects to the way that we hire and promote. Everything about that is owned by everyone. And that's one of the ways you change the systems. You think of JEDI as risk management. You can avoid large payouts to people who've been harassed. You can avoid bad press. And more importantly, you can open new markets by creating innovation. We have a mountain of evidence that highly diverse teams, and most of the studies are done on racially diverse and or gender diverse teams, highly diverse teams greatly outperform monocultures. Teams that come in and have everybody thinking the same, they don't break the mold. They don't truly disrupt the industries they claim to disrupt. They may cause a lot of problems, but they're not doing the sort of innovation that can really create substantial change and generate income for the company. And then last of all, make sure you're using the right levers. It is amazing what 2 or 3 people can do to influence one person who has control over a lever while everyone else is out focusing on food, famous people, and festivals. So thank you for listening. We've got just like 2 minutes for questions. I do want to say I offer one-on-one coaching, anti-racism workshops, and any custom program to go much deeper into all of this, but it's not really about me. Whether you use these things or not, the thing to really think about is think about the systems that are at play and not just the individuals that are at play. So any questions? Go ahead and type in the chat window if there's anything you want to know. I don't see any questions. So once again, my name is Cindy Gross, and I'm at befriendingdragons.com. And I want to thank you all for coming today. And I hope that you're able to use some of the tools that I've presented to create lasting change in your workplace, your lives, and your communities. Thank you.